Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Allen, and welcome to the International Security Training webinar on Vaults and Safes 101. I'll be your instructor today, so let's go ahead and rock and roll. It should be a pretty exciting topic to those of us in the security industry. Uh, if one thing had to be the reason, it's technology. Technology, electronics, and interweaving and tying everything together has made this a very interesting and for access control companies and safe manufacturers a very profitable industry. But today we're going to focus on just you and your client and what your needs are. So we're going to introduce some container options, then we're going to review a few different lock considerations, and then identify some forms of attack and theft that have been used in the past, some of the old school options, and also some of the more popular options. So when you're looking at container options, the first thing I want you to do is look at what your client either already has or what they're asking you to purchase. And ask a simple question: is it really a safe? Just because it's a big box, a heavy box with a combination lock on it, does not mean it's a safe. What I want you to do is go ahead and look for containers that are burglary and fire resistant. I want you to look for containers that are both. Now this is if the client's budget will allow, okay? Because there are containers out there that are just burglary resistant, and then there are fire safes and fire containers and fire cabinets as well. So the determining factor, I guess, really would be what are you protecting, okay? But in the perfect world, when money is not an object, hey, I'm going to get a container that has both of these ratings on there from UL, which is the Underwriters Laboratory. Manufacturers will send a product of theirs to the Underwriters Laboratory and let them run a bunch of tests on there. So when you have the ratings, you'll be good to go. Another thing to continue or to consider once you have the container itself is placement. Okay, for those of you who have gone through our security management course and our executive protection course, you'll remember that we talked about the rings of security. In most environments, your safes or your vaults are going to be located within the innermost ring of security for sensitive assets. Okay. Now another thing that will affect the placement is regulatory and insurance requirements, okay? The regulatory requirements tend to be the minimum required by law. Insurance companies tend to increase the standard just a little bit. Why would they do that? Because they don't want to pay on any claims if they can prevent it. All right. I guess to look at what regulatory agencies you might have to deal with, well, it depends on what you are protecting. Are you protecting controlled substances? EDP is electronic data processing, okay? And if you have insurance and you already have EDP coverage, listen, it's not the same as VP coverage or valuable papers. So you will really want to dig into your insurance policy and see what's protected and what's not protected. And then also we have high dollar valuables. Okay, so depending on what you have is going to determine what regulations you have to follow, what your insurance company is going to want you to do, and then they're going to sometimes all this decision making is done very easily for you by your insurance company in the regulations. For example, for several years I worked with a company that manufactured and shipped controlled substances. It was a pharmaceutical company, so we often had the DEA that would come in and do audits of our facilities, and then on top of the DEA, or I should say in addition to the DEA, we had a third-party auditor that specialized in the Drug Enforcement Administration. I'm based out of the U.S., so this topic, I guess, or this little blurb here is focused on the U.S. All right. So the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Administration, they told us at a minimum what our thresholds had to be on the safes in the vaults, what the placement had to be, what layers of security outside of our vaults we had to have. They looked at our policies to see if our policies were stringent enough. So I really did everything I could. I was the safety security manager at the time. I worked with them to make my proposals very solid. That way, when I needed money to make certain enhancements, the company had no choice but to improve my purchase orders, or in one case, a capital expenditure request. So, moving on, let's look at lock considerations. Just like the containers themselves, you will want to make sure that the locks are under Writers Laboratory rated. Okay. Now, what does the UL ratings do? It just rates your box or your locks, okay, the containers or the locks, on certain thresholds, whether it's blunt force thresholds, whether it's temperature thresholds. All right, what is the quality of this container or lock? And it will rate it at a minimum standard. So you want to make sure that you have those things taken care of. When we look at locking dials and handles, there is a commonality that I've been seeing, or that's been around for a long time, between the two of them. Manufacturers will also often create these things so that a key and combination is needed to use them. And this is good. I've seen this at a McDonald's when I was a teenager. I worked at a McDonald's in Scottsdale, Arizona. We had a floor safe, okay, and that's where we would put all of our cash. Well, it had to be opened by two people. One manager had the key, the shift manager had the key, the store manager had the combination. Okay, so it really took two people to open up the floor safe, and when you have more eyes on the money, you have a lower probability of pilferage occurring and theft of the cash. Another place I saw this was in the military. Whenever you have nukes, okay, a lot of times they will have safes and vaults that protect the nukes, and they will have a key and combo team and an SOP assigned to each vault. So it's an interesting and very effective system. Alarmed locks. This is a basic course, but man, technology, like I said earlier, is awesome right now. You can get your safe and tie it right into your access control system, which ties into your alarm system, and then all the triggers that we have to consider can be taken care of, and they can be set off so that way when there is a noise, a vibration, an impact, and two or more incorrect combination attempts, maybe with the iris scanners for the eyes, if somebody tries to use what is an allowed combination with an inappropriate eye scan, this will set off alarms, and hopefully you have a response team that can go check it out. So alarmed locks and safes and rooms are very cool. Relockers. A lot of people don't know exactly what a relocker is. Okay, well, what it is it's an auxiliary bolt or a bolt blocker that gets triggered by an impact or thermal or heat or vibration. Okay, so how does this work? You have a safe, and the bad guys break in. They're in the inner perimeter of your security. They're working the safe, and they start trying to drill, punch, or peel, or maybe they have a heat cutting torch. They're trying to get through the side of the container itself. What that does is that activates the relocker. It's a bolt or a bolt blocker that there is no access to this thing from the outside. It's all internal, and it's set up to defeat these more primitive types of thieves. Okay. Another thing you want to look at is policies. Okay. So you're going to have all the technology, you're going to have all the hardware, the different types of containers taken care of, but you have to have strong policies in place that are reviewed annually or semi-annually, and obviously you'll want to follow the regulatory and insurance requirements there as well. I think the two most prominent policies in place for most companies are the two-person rule and the combination change frequency. For instance, there is a minimum of 2 people that must be present anytime a vault is opened, and sometimes there's a third person, which would also be the CCTV surveillance officer. That's one policy. And another one says that every 20 to 30 days there must be a combination change frequency. It will also, and this is the same thing as passwords, okay, if it's an electronic or a computer-based opening system. So that's what we have as far as policies are concerned. Now let's look at forms of attack and theft. The most basic one is the drag-away. And if you guys have been watching the news over the last couple of years, man, not only does this hit safes, but it also hits ATMs. It takes a lot of, it's pretty ballsy, and I apologize for the term, it's not too professional, but it takes a lot of courage to break into a building, grab a safe or grab an ATM, throw it on a refrigerator dolly, and haul it off. Because the reason why the bad guys will do this is because the locks are getting so technical and so difficult to defeat. They want to take this back to their hideaway, to their house, to their safe area, and have time to work on that container. All right, so that's the drag away or the cart offs. Is they used to call them cart offs in the school that I went to, one of my bodyguard schools. So remember that. Another form of attack is called punching. Okay, it's kind of old school. It's where the bad guys will try to pry off the dial, and they'll take a punch. And actually, I should put in there a punch in like a sledgehammer. And what they do is they work on the spindle and any of the locking components to try to push those things out of the way, which will release the locking mechanism and they can open the door. So punching is kind of old school. If you go back to the previous slide, this is where your relocker comes into play and really keeps you safer. Ripping and chopping. All right, the next two things we're going to talk about are done really mostly with insulated containers, and that's when people buy fire safes to protect their valuables and their documents. And I really want people, again, to realize that just because it's a fire safe does not mean it's foolproof. So again, like I said, I think in the first or second slide, make sure you get a container that is both fire and burglary resistance rated from the UL. Okay. What is ripping and chopping? Well, it's where they take heavy metal cutting tools. Some of these are mechanical, some of them are thermal torches, and they actually cut a hole in the side of the front of the container. Okay, it's a pretty brutal way to do it, but it can be effective depending on how much time they have. Peeling, again, this is almost mostly done with the insulated fire safes. It's where they take a sledgehammer and some prying tools to create an opening, normally done in the corner opposite of the hinges. So if you go to the upper, let's say right hand corner of a container, you start working it, you crease it in the corner a little bit, and then you peel it, and then once you peel it, the door is going to have a spreading tool inserted in the gap, or just sheer force if the guy's got a long enough lever to work on that. So again, ripping, chopping, and peeling, these are actually, all this stuff is kind of old school, but it can be done if time is made available, especially by dragaways or cart offs. So interesting thing to consider. We're hitting 12 and a half minutes here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up in a conclusion. I want you guys to know what you're protecting, and not just on the surface. You say, well, I protect cocaine HCl from my pharmaceutical manufacturer, or I'm protecting diamonds. You want to know exactly what you're protecting based on legal and insurance requirements. Okay, you want to know what container options are available, what containers you have to have by minimal legal requirements and insurance requirements, and then if you want to exceed the standard of security, which ones would be there if money was available to make this purchase. I often like to address some of the difficulties I've had in getting purchase orders approved and capital expenditures approved. All right. A lot of times the companies will go with the very minimal legal requirements, which kind of makes sense from a business standpoint. But if there is an increasing amount of activity in criminal threats toward what you're protecting, you might want to go with the recommendations of the insurance company. So take that for whatever it's worth to you in your situation, and I oftentimes will actually consult with my insurance company and the agent that comes out and does maybe the audit or the review for us annually, and get them to help me write up a PO, so that way it makes the decision makers in the company that I'm working for feel that there is no option but to make this purchase. My goal and loyalty is to my company. I want them to be as safe as possible, but sometimes they feel security is a little bit of a pain in the butt or an expense, since security is not an income generating or profit generating department of their company. So that being said, I hope you guys have gotten a little bit of information that is of value to you from this webinar. My name is Brian Allen with International Security Training, and until next time, stay safe.